All right, welcome back to our verse by verse Bible study through the book of Judges. We just came out of chapters 6 and 7, which was Gideon's story. And if you haven't already watched those videos, I'll link them above. You might want to go back and start there because chapter 8 picks up right where chapter 7 left off. So, quick recap: God called Gideon out of hiding when he was threshing grain, hiding in a wine press, afraid. Remember, Gideon doubted. He asked for signs. He needed confirmation at every step, and God still worked through him. And then in chapter 7, God took their army of 32,000 men down to 300 men just so that they could not claim it was within their own power that they won that battle. They routed Midian, and it was one of the clearest examples of God's power in this entire book so far. So now we're at chapter 8, and I want you to watch for something. Now Gideon is in his everyday life. He's not in an extreme moment, and his faith looks a little differently than when it did in that big moment. Being faithful in battle and being faithful in everyday life are two different skills. So watch him. Open with me and let's read starting at verse 1. The men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us, not calling us when you went to fight against the Midianites?" And they argued with him violently. So he said to them, "What have I done now compared to you? Is not the gleaning of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God handed over to you Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian. What was I able to do compared to you?" When he said this, their anger against him subsided. So Gideon is doing something very wise. The men of Ephraim were very jealous that they weren't called to battle to begin with. And Gideon is soothing their pride by complimenting them and giving them the recognition that they craved. And this reminds us of Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath. Verse 4. Gideon and the 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it. They were exhausted, but still in pursuit. He said to the men of Sukoth, "Please give some loaves of bread to the troops under my command, because they are exhausted, for I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the princes of Sukoth asked, "Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon replied, "Very well. When the Lord has handed Zebah and Zalmunna over to me, I will tear your flesh with thorns and briars from the wilderness." He went from there to Penuel and asked the same thing from them. The men of Penuel answered just as the men of Sukoth had. He also told the men of Penuel, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and with them was their army of about 15,000 men, who were all those left of the entire army of the Kedemites. Before we keep reading and turn the page, let's get some context here. So these are his own countrymen, Sukoth, the men of Sukoth, the men of Penuel, and they didn't want to support until the battle was over. They wanted to know that it was already won. They wanted that security and that comfort, that assurance. And this could be applied in modern day to when family and friends and people who you think should be supporting you discourage you. And don't let that hinder you from doing the work. That can often be the case, that your own people turn against you or doubt you or don't want to help you out. And they want to see, they're waiting. They're just waiting to see the finished work. Gideon's not asking them to join the battle. He's just asking them to support those who are on the front lines. So he's really not asking for much, but yet they are still unwilling to give. And we're about to see how Gideon responds. Verse 10, now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and with them was their army of about 15,000 men, who were all those left of the entire army of the Kedemites. Those who had been killed were 120,000 armed men. Gideon traveled on the caravan route east of Nobath and Jogbehah and attacked their army while the army felt secure. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them. He captured these two kings of Midian and routed the entire army. So the previous work of God actually encouraged him to have boldness and trust in God for great things in the present. So he had no problem making this attack. And he fought until the battle was won. He was in pursuit of these two kings, and he didn't stop until he captured them. Now remember, Gideon has promised revenge for the countrymen who chose not to help. Now that he's actually done what he said he's going to do, let's pick up in verse 13. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. He captured a youth from the men of Sukoth and interrogated him. The youth wrote down for him the names of the 77 leaders and elders of Sukoth. Then he went to the men of Sukoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You taunted me about them, saying, 'Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your power that we should give bread to your exhausted men?' So he took the elders of the city, and he took some thorns and briars from the wilderness, and he disciplined the men of Sukoth with them. He also tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city." So this discipline, he's publicly whipping the leaders of the city as a method of public rebuke. And then he goes and kills the men of Penuel. Did you notice the contrast here? When the men of Ephraim were angry and offended by Gideon, he answered them gently and deferred honor to them. But with the men of Sukoth and Penuel, he punishes them severely. He tears them with thorns, and he kills the men of Penuel. Now remember, the text is unclear whether this was just punishment, but I do think it reveals there was a hardness in post-victory Gideon that wasn't there when he was under pressure. And winning a battle doesn't make you automatically gracious. In fact, it might just reveal the real character that was underneath all along. Power, even God-given power, has a way of doing that. Let's keep reading. Verse 18, he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "They were like you," they said. "Each resembled the son of a king." So he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you." Then he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." The youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Get up and strike us down for yourself, for a man is judged by his strength." So Gideon got up, killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. So this is quite the revelation. The kings were responsible for killing Gideon's brothers. And they knew that they deserved death, and they encouraged their own executioner. "You do it. Don't let your son do it." Verse 22. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you delivered us from the power of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Then he said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder." Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So let's back up. This is great. These are humble words, and these are early signs of Israel's desire for a king. God would give them a king hundreds of years later. That's the book of Kings that's further ahead. But he's saying, no, the glory goes to the Lord. Now the words are humble, but his actions that are about to follow are a little bit king-like. So let's keep reading. They said, "We agree to give them." So they spread out a cloak, and everyone threw an earring from his plunder on it. The weight of the gold earrings he requested was 43 pounds of gold, in addition to the crescent ornaments and ear pendants, the purple garments on the kings of Midian, and the chains on the necks of their camels. Gideon made an ephod from all of this and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. Then all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. An ephod is a shirt-like garment. It's an imitation of what a high priest would wear. More on that in a moment. So this may have been prompted by a competitive attitude towards Ephraim. So remember in verses 1 to 3, he was building up their pride and, basically saying like, "You guys are so great. How can I compare? Don't worry about the fact that I didn't include you in the battle earlier." And background on Ephraim, they had prestige and influence. The tabernacle at the time was in their territory. And so it could have been a rival place of worship to have the ephod as a place of worship. Okay, let's think about this for a minute. Gideon didn't fall in battle. He didn't fall when his men were at 300. He didn't fall when Israel came wanting to crown him king. He handled all of that. He makes an ephod, a religious object, a priestly garment. And this isn't a statue of a Canaanite god. It's something more subtle. It looks like worship. It looks like a commemoration of what God did. Probably everybody thought it was fine, maybe even reverent. Yet, it became a snare. The whole country comes to Ophrah to worship it, and Gideon doesn't do anything about it. So this is what I keep thinking about. It might be easier to honor God in an extreme moment. When the decision is obvious, 300 men against an entire army, either you trust God or you don't. The choice is right in front of you and the stakes are clear. But ordinary, everyday life, that requires a different kind of courage. The quiet courage to say no to something that looks religious but actually doesn't honor God. The consistency to keep pointing people back to God when nothing dramatic is happening. The faithfulness to not let something subtle slowly draw people away from God. That's harder to sustain And that's where Gideon just didn't hold. So Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and they were no longer a threat. The land had peace for 40 years during the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, son of Joash, went back to live at his house. Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, since he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. We also see Gideon has this inability to control his sexual lust, and he's proudly displaying his wealth by having these concubines. So that's going to be a problem. And then Abimelech, one of his sons, he's going to show up in the next chapter, means my father, a king. It seems he intended for his son to lead Israel once he was gone. It's in the root of his name and a way to kind of jab at Ephraim. Verse 33, when Gideon died, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves by worshiping the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God who had rescued them from the hand of the enemies around them. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good he had done for Israel. So we can say that Gideon handled adversity better than success, right? Baal-berith, this compound word, is regarded as Baal as the covenant god. So they're really deep in it. So in a kind of twisted way, by serving Baal, they're serving the memory of Gideon in his later years well. Because remember, he was consumed with money. He thought success was really all that mattered. He started to slip away, and that's exactly what the Israelites are doing. And so he showed them that by his example. So the chapter ends here. The moment Gideon is gone, Israel turns straight back to Baal worship. They forget what God did. They didn't show loyalty to Gideon's family. Gideon had 40 years of peace, 40 years of leadership, 40 years to anchor people back to God after the battle. And the text gives us no evidence that he did. He refused the crown, that was right, but then he made the ephod, and that drew people away. He built a life, he had sons, he died well, but the people around him were never re-anchored. The courageous moment in battle, he got that right, but the long, quiet, daily work of faithfulness and pointing people back to God, re-anchoring them, staying anchored to God yourself in the ordinary days, that's where he drifted. And you can be a genuine hero of faith and still drift in the quiet. Gideon is in Hebrews 11. God was still gracious to him and through him, and yet this still happened. So just remember with this chapter, and as you get ready to click out of this video, that most of life isn't a big battle. It's actually the ordinary, everyday faithfulness that we need to put into practice. And that's its own kind of discipline. Chapter 9, we're going to see exactly what grows when a household shifts. So subscribe, comment what stood out to you most from this chapter, share this video with someone else who needs the breakdown, and I'll see you next time in chapter 9.